So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the book seminar for Tor Ove Benjaminsen's and Hannah Svarstad's new book, Political Ecology, A Critical Engagement with Global Environmental Issues. This is what the book looks like for those of you who have just the PDF or have not yet picked up your copy. So I'm Melanie Sommerville. I'm a new tenure track postdoctoral fellow here at Neimark, or the Department of International Environment and Development Studies at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. It's good to see a solid turnout for our event. This event is organized by the new Political Ecology Forum that's recently been established at NMBU. The forum functions as a physical and virtual meeting place for academics and students who are interested in the political dimension of environment and development debates. And it operates as a cluster of the International Political Ecology Network, or POLIN. And I think some of the events, in fact, will be organized in collaboration with POLIN Norway. You can find the website for the forum at politicalecology.space. I'll enter it into the chat pane afterwards for those of you who may not have seen it. And you'll find there links to recent publications, to some PhD courses that are associated with the forum, and events such as this seminar. And this is actually the second book seminar that we held on the 18th of June, so last Friday. We had a seminar on Bram Buscher's new book, The Truth About Nature, Environmentalism in the Era of Post-Truth Politics and Platform Capitalism. And I can see that Bram is with us again this morning. It was a really excellent event, and the video has now been posted on the forum website under the events tab. So I encourage you to go and watch it. And I'm sure that today's event will be equally engaging. So in terms of organization, we'll start with short presentations by Tor Ove and Hannah to give us an overview of the book and its relevance for current debates around knowledge production. As most of you, I think, will know, Tor Ove is a professor here at Neimark at NMBU, and Hannah is a professor at Oslo Met. Both have written quite extensively on different aspects of political ecology, and I think they each plan to speak for about 15 minutes. We'll then turn the floor over to our three discussants. So we'll do them in the order that they appear on the poster for the event. So we'll start with Anwesha Dutta, a senior researcher from the Christian Michelsen Institute, who brings a political ecology approach to work on different environmental issues like forestry, wildlife conservation, and resource extraction. And then we'll turn to Mariel Aguilar-Støen, a professor of human geography with the Center for Development and the Environment at the University of Oslo. And then finally, we'll hear from Benjamin Neimark, who's a senior lecturer at the Lancaster Environment Center at Lancaster University, and who's similarly both a human geographer and a political ecologist. So for the discussants, you'll each have about 10 minutes to offer comments and pose questions to the author. And Tor and Hannah, you'll obviously get a chance to respond. We can either collect a few questions together and then you can respond, or if there's something particularly urgent that needs addressed, we can go sort of comment by comment. And then hopefully we'll have a few minutes left to open the floor to questions from the audience. So please note that we're recording the seminar and that it will be posted on the forum website afterwards. So if you have a question but prefer not to be recorded, you have two options. So one is to type the question into the chat pane, and I'll keep my eye on the pane and then relay the question to Tor and Hannah. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand function, but then just say, I prefer not to be recorded, or well, that's a bit tricky because then you would still be recorded at that point. Maybe use the chat pane in that case to say, I'm happy to speak, but I'd like not to be recorded. And then we can pause the recording at that point and restart it afterwards. But if you don't self-identify to me, then we'll assume that you're okay with being recorded. So yeah, I think those are the introductory remarks I need to make. So Tor Ove, we're starting with you, I think. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melanie, for that introduction, and thank you all for showing up, for showing interest in our book. I think I'll start by sharing screen. Yeah, so this is the cover of our book, and you might have wondered what, those of you who have seen, not only seen the PDF, but we have seen actually the book. You might have wondered what this image represents. And it's actually a photo taken by our daughter, Eline Benjaminsen, who is the photographer. And it's the photo of a tree in an area that is being prepared to become a carbon offsetting project in the Rift Valley in Kenya. And it's a product of the technique called photogrammetry. And it aims to visualize the carbon that is being made into a commodity and sold for such projects. So that's just in case you wondered what this image represents. So what I will do is first to give a bit of about the background to this book and its approach, and then I'll say a little bit about the case, one of the cases that we discuss in this book, because it's a case-based book. We present a number of cases, so we thought it would make sense also to at least present one of these cases in this introduction. And then Hanne will take over and say a little bit more about the approach in this book. So the aim of this book is really to provide a relatively accessible textbook in political ecology to students, both at the bachelor's and at the master's level. We actually think that it can be used at both levels, although we primarily had undergraduate students in mind when we wrote, at least when we wrote the more theoretical parts. We tried to, write for students that do not have prior knowledge of political ecology and the various tools that we use in political ecology. In addition, this is not a textbook that introduces all aspects of political ecology. That would be a rather daunting task anyway, because political ecology has grown to become a broad field with many different internal approaches. So we present our approach to political ecology, which has a focus on, or is inspired by Marxist political economy, discourse theory and discourse analysis, and we also draw on natural science contributions when this is relevant. It's also based on our own research, and which has mostly been carried out in Africa and in Norway. So there is then admittedly also a geographical bias here. There are many parts of the world that we don't cover. And since our research also mostly has been in rural areas, we also say little about urban political ecology. And we also don't go into the so-called more than human turn that also has been used to some extent in parts of political ecology studies. We find that this approach does not go so well with political ecology, at least part of that more than human turn, because of a flat ontology, and which may be seen as being in contradiction to political ecology with its focus on power. So political ecology is about studying the connections between global, national, and local levels of environmental governance. And by using the example of Norway combined with cases from the global south in some of the chapters, we have aimed to illustrate how political ecology in the global north and south may be interconnected. So that's the main aim or focus in the book, to demonstrate this interconnectedness between political ecologies in the global north and south. So I will briefly give one such example from Sami reindeer pastoralism in a minute, and Hanne will say a bit about Norway's climate policy that are sort of examples of this interconnectedness. Now a bit about the background to this book, because it builds on a Norwegian edition that first came in 2010. You have the 2010 edition to the left here. And then in a extensively revised edition in 2017. And this English edition is again an extensively revised edition from the last Norwegian edition. So this is far from a translation. All chapters have been reworked, some more than others. And there are also a couple of new chapters. Chapter 2 and chapter 10 are completely new, and at least 5 of the other chapters have been completely rewritten with new cases. So since this is a case-based book and political ecology, I would say, is also case-based. So we should also in this presentation then, as I said, give you some sense of the cases we present. So I'll now in the rest of my introduction here say a little bit about the relationship and the problematic relationship between the Norwegian state and Sami reindeer pastoralism, which is also relevant to debates about decolonization and about the role of ecology in political ecology. So this is Jovset Antesara. He's a young Sami reindeer pastoralist. And in 2016, he took the Norwegian state to court because of its destocking policy that forces him to reduce his herd to only 75 reindeer. And he argues that he cannot make a living from only having 75 reindeer. So this policy is based on the widespread idea in Norway that there are too many reindeer and by implication also too many reindeer pastoralists, which is said to lead to overstocking of in particular the winter pastures. And in fact, we find that the Norwegian pastoral policy is actually more top-down and more heavy-handed than some of the pastoral policies we have observed in various African countries, although they can be quite top-down as well. So these claims of overstocking have been justified scientifically or supported scientifically in public debates by a group of biologists who have received generous funding from the Ministries of Agriculture and Environment. And while these biologists have been very vocal in public debates in Norway, they have been much less clear in their scientific publications, which are then peer-reviewed and I suppose where it's harder to get away with the nonsense. Some of these biologists have also served as witnesses for the state against Sara in the court cases. And by the way, Sara won the first two instances. He won in the primary court and in the secondary court, but he then lost in the Supreme Court in December 2017. And I think this picture is from the Supreme Court. And now his case is with the UN Commission for Human Rights in Geneva, and we are still waiting for their statement, which will be advisory to the Norwegian government. Okay, so let me briefly go through some of these debates around Sami reindeer herding in Norway. Let me see. But first, let me just remind you that the land of the Sami, which is called Sápmi, covers a large part of northern Scandinavia, including northern Finland and part of the Kola Peninsula in Russia. This map is actually, if you look up Sápmi in Wikipedia, you get this map. And I think it's a conservative estimate of the size of the land historically used by the Sami, because even today you find Sami reindeer herding in Norway and Sweden south of the area marked here. And that area has also been shrinking over time. And also this is not I should say that this is not an exclusive territory. Of course, there has been overlapping between Norwegians and Sami historically, but this is sort of the land that Sami have been using more or less. So Sápmi has been under colonial suppression for at least 250 years in these countries, in parallel to the development of the state. In Norway, there was forced Norwegianization for many decades, meaning, for instance, that Sami language was banned in schools and that Sami needed to change to Norwegian names in order to own land. But still, in the recent debate about decolonization in Norway, quite a few leading academics have claimed that this debate is not relevant to Norway and that we should not import, debates from the US. And these people don't even seem to know that the recent debate on decolonization started in South Africa. And the most recent and still ongoing colonization of Sápmi is what is currently happening in relation to between the state and reindeer pastoralism. So I'll briefly go through that debate, or our arguments in that debate. But first, for those who are not familiar with the Sami reindeer pastoralism, I should probably mention that, you know, the land use is moving from the winter pastures to the summer pastures and then back again. The blue areas here are the winter pastures, which are said to be the scarce resource, and that then is said to be overstocked or overused. And the red areas are the summer pastures. So the reindeer herders move from the winter pastures in spring, that is late April, early May, and then back again in October, early November. So, and the main sort of resource that I said to be depleted on the winter pastures is lichen. So lichen is what is usually discussed as being overgrazed. And so the question then is, what do we know about the state of these lichen pastures on the winter pastures? And we do know quite a bit, actually, because the Norwegian Institute of Nature Research, NINA, was commissioned by the Minister of Agriculture and Food in the 1990s to carry out a monitoring of the winter pastures. So they have monitored the winter pastures on more than 50 sites in 1998, 2005, 2010, and on a smaller number of sites in 2013 and 18. And the results are quite interesting, actually, because from 98 to 2005, they found a considerable increase in the lichen coverage and the thickness of the lichen layer, which is the fact that is underreported in the Norwegian debate. And from 2005 to 2010, there was then a small decrease. And since then, there has been, based on the measurements from 2013 and 18, there is a mixed development, so declines in some places and increases in other places. But all in all, it's hard to use these data to claim that there is a crisis and general overstocking of the winter pastures. But the researchers behind this have, through what I would argue is cherry picking, they have used parts of this to still argue in the public debate that there is overstocking, while interestingly in their scientific publications, they have a much more nuanced argument. And the last scientific publication coming out of this research is actually as far back as 2012. And it had the title Rapid Recovery of the Lichen Pastures. And the argument there is that there was a decline in the 1990s, but since then the pastures have recovered, which is, so they have different narratives in their scientific publications and in the public debate. Another set of data that has been used to support the overstocking narrative is taken from satellite images. And then you get these sort of maps produced that and are often used by actors who argue that there is serious overstocking. So you get this red color, extending and increasing over time. So the red is then supposed to be overgrazed, orange moderately grazed, and white intact. And you might also wonder what intact refers to here, because this is, after all, a pastoral landscape that has been intensively used for centuries. But here it seems like the 1970s perhaps is, or 1980s is sort of the reference landscape that was seen as an intact landscape. There are many problems with these, the use of satellite images in this way and the production of such maps. I'll just mention briefly some of the problems. That is, one is to reduce the diversity of the landscape to a simplified, I would almost say, cartoon in this case. Another problem is that the maps assume that all change comes from pastoral use, but the main landscape change actually happening in this area is what is called gjengroing in Norwegian, bush encroachment. That is willow and small birch taking over the landscape. And this is a change that is happening all over Norway, and which is usually said to be caused by climate change in the research literature, and sometimes also by reduced pasture. But suddenly here in the Sami areas, the change is claimed to be caused by overstocking. And finally, also, and this is more of a methodological issue, the lichen under the bushes cannot be seen on the satellite images. So they're clearly maybe more lichen than what these maps and satellite images suggest. So I will end here. This was just a quick example to show you how debates about colonization, decolonization, and the politics of environmental knowledge are also relevant in a country like Norway, which is often associated with values such as human and indigenous rights and sustainable development. So then I'll leave it to Hanne to take over.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tor. And I just wanted to say that I can see that there's already one question in the chat pane, but we'll just save it until after the discussants. So Hanne, you're up next. Is she online still? Oh, yeah.
I need to get on with my pictures here. Is this okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. So then I would like to say something about why we wrote this book. We did that to introduce political ecology to new generations. And we did write it because we think that political ecology can be used to produce a type of knowledge that is actually necessary if citizens are to get information about ongoing exploitation of people and of the planet, and about how and why that happens. We do call the book Political Ecology a critical engagement with global environmental issues. A main reason that we use the word critical is to indicate that the book offers tools for students and others to critically examine how environmental issues actually are handled today in mainstream approaches and solutions, and to also uncover which of the win-win claims that are too good to be true. So we hope that the book can contribute to inspire new generations to meet injustice and unsustainability with better strategies than the greenwashing and SDG buttons. The book aims at encouraging students to start filling up their analytical toolboxes. And in order to understand the world and to analyze specific issues, students will need a lot of analytical tools. And we do present some useful theories and concepts and approaches that we ourselves have found particularly useful. And as Tor mentioned, we have tried to present theory in a simple and basic manner so that even bachelor students can benefit from it. And also those who enter the field of political ecology from other studies than social sciences. In the first two chapters, we present theoretical tools in terms, actually in the first chapter, we present theory and in terms of 10 syntheses in political ecology. And these are those we think characterized the field. And one of these syntheses consists of social constructivist studies, so discourses and narratives, and in combination with realist studies. And often the realist studies that we emphasize in the book consist of examining claims that these constructions contain about the reality of practices and conditions. Another synthesis that we present here is about the combination of some important power perspectives. Power is, of course, central in all political ecology. In this first chapter, we demonstrate uses of these tools in a case study of the political ecology of Pandora. So this is the planet where the Avatar movie takes place. And some may think that Pandora is not at all real, and that it is far out in space. And that is, of course, true. But James Cameron's narrative is in many ways similar to real struggles that political ecologists often study. What do political ecologists do when they do political ecology? Many of us tend to do case studies. At least Tor and I do. So the book is full of case studies. Some of them are about fiction, such as the Avatar movie, and also the movie Medicine Man that we used to discuss the real activity of bioprospecting. Most of the cases that we present in the book are real cases that we have examined in our own studies of different issues, such as studies in rural areas of bioprospecting in Tanzania and in Norway, and pastoralism in Mali and in Norway, conservation in a few cases in African countries and also in India, gender conservation in Norway, and a study of a case of red reducing deforestation and forest degradation in an area of Tanzania. And there are also other such case studies in the book where something happens in rural areas and how this is connected to interventions from powerful interests far away from these locations. So the next question that I want to pose is why doing political ecology case studies? I think this is one of the things we ourselves often take for granted within the epistemic community of political ecologists. But quite often we are confronted with a more or less total disparagement of the value of case studies. And these might come either from positivist or quantitative perspectives within the social sciences, or from politicians or bureaucrats. In our book, we provide a few methodology boxes, and one of them is about case studies. I think that case studies can provide some of the most important and needed knowledge about serious types of environmental and climate colonialism that takes place today and affect future generations as well as marginalized people, and that take place in many remote areas around the world. And these are injustices in time and in space, and they will continue if they are not uncovered and exposed by critical researchers. When doing well, case studies provide knowledge of value, not only about the understanding of the case in question, but also of relevance for other cases. some case studies have tremendous value when, for instance, it's revealed that a case claimed to be a win-win actually turns out to be a great failure. And sometimes the value of case studies is really high when the researchers identify mechanisms and other insights relevant to a large group of cases. And many other cases might also produce valuable knowledge just because they contribute to cumulative knowledge about situations in cases of a particular type of environmental interventions. For political ecology to make sense, knowledge about unacceptable situations in the remote rural areas in the world must be analyzed and explained not only in their localities, but also from what interventions that they do result from. So one of the things Tord and I try to do in the book is to illustrate this from our positions as Norwegian citizens. And Tord showed an example of that with the study from Sami reindeer herding. But that also happens. Neo-colonial activities of the Norwegian government and of other Norwegian actors happens all over the world as well. The focus on the role of Norway behind environmental interventions is, of course, important knowledge for our students that Tord and I and others teach in Norway. But how interesting is that really for political ecology students in other countries? Our intention is that the book can be useful for students anywhere to discuss what happens in their countries in comparison with cases that the book presents. And we have included some resources for students and lecturers, for instance, that we end up each chapter with a few questions to encourage comparisons from the cases we present in the book and to cases of specific relevance for each reader. So we hope the book can be useful for students at universities in countries where many neo-colonial interventions take place today. And we also hope that it can be seen relevant to students in countries where neo-colonial interventions are created, like Norway. In chapter 6, we try to explain Norway's leading role in red-based interventions as an element of the Norwegian climate mitigation strategy from the early 1990s and up to now. And here, a striking focus in that strategy has been to remove the attention from restricting the country's fossil fuel activity and over to something else. The petroleum lobby has really been clever in this when it comes to influencing climate mitigation politics in Norway. And red has served this purpose well for a long time now. And I want to end up with mentioning a related incident from just last week. The man in the picture is Anders Oppedal. He is the CEO of Norway's large petroleum company, Equinor. Last week, he presented the company's new climate target that he said would imply that Equinor makes a fast change in a green direction. So here we go again, I thought, because this was clearly an element in the Norwegian never-ending story about how to create ways to conceal the continuation of fossil fuel activities and at the same time call the strategy green and sustainable. But then I discovered that media, Norwegian media, actually presented this immediately as the nonsense that it was. So then I thought, wow, perhaps we have a beginning of a real change here, even in Norway. And in that case, I think that critical researchers must have contributed in some ways to this. Most of us scholars do not at all have much impact. But I think that the field of political ecology can produce many studies that all together can influence crucial changes. So Tor and I hope that the book will contribute to inspire new generations to examine critically the global crisis and the flawed solutions and to act accordingly. So now we have both said something about our intentions and a little bit about the content of the book, and we really look forward to comments from the three discussants and also from the rest of you. Thank you. Excellent.
Okay, thanks so much, Hannah. So we'll start with Anwesha. Anwesha, do you want to? I don't know if you have anything that you need to share your screen, or if you just have comments. But yeah. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'll be brief, and thank you so much, Tor and Hannah, for having me and have me discuss this extremely important book. And I mean, Tor and Hannah, you are really modest in the way you have spoken about the book and the way you have even, written some parts, because I think the book does so much more. To me, it took me on a sort of a conceptual, theoretical, empirical voyage towards political ecological pathways of understanding human nature relationships and the way it has even evolved. And I particularly like your reference to sci-fi movies, and I think that is something that has been totally missing. We academics also need to have fun with what exists around us. And I think what this book really does is that, to me, after reading this textbook, students will never go to a national park and look at it as just a national park. Students will not watch a sci-fi movie and just, go home and think that Avatar was just about that. And this took me back to when I was, I think, a final year bachelor student or first year master students when I watched Avatar. And I thought something was wrong. This is not how things should be. But I didn't have your book at that time to read to understand what possibly could have been these interlinkages or forms of oppressions or, hegemonic relationships and discourses that was at production that made the complexities of this Hollywood movie. And to me, what you have succeeded very well in doing this in this book is that you present your 10 theses, which I think are extremely relevant and in a way builds on Paul Robbins' earlier political ecology book, but you also bring your own rich empirical case studies from across the globe. Tor, you said very modestly that these are limiting, but I don't think these are limiting at all, because you almost cover most of the world. Of course, I would have liked something from Australia and the US, but I think Norway in some way makes up for it. And the reason I say Norway, because as someone who grew up in the third world, I tend to have internalized this colonial hangover. And when I came to Norway, I thought, oh, this is so perfect. We can speak our minds, there's human rights and all of that. And come the chapter on feminizing or feminist political ecology, it really made me see how gender operates at a structural level, even in Norway. And I wondered if you spoke to these women and what they had to talk about it. Because although at a structural level, it might be operating in a similar way, I don't think it's exactly same, say, a rural area in India, where to begin with, the farm would not be in the woman's name. And if it is in the woman's name, it would probably be to save taxes or because of some reservation policy, which makes it compulsory to do so. So I was very curious to know what women themselves in rural Norway have to say about it. And what does this tell us about Norwegian society as it is? Because I find it to be a very conflict-averse society, giving away Nobel Peace Prize and all that stuff. But what is really going on in this society where taxpayers can be so oblivious to this? You know, you talk about commodity fetishism, but I think there's something more going on, this Equinor constantly greenwashing. Or I recently heard a podcast where the Prime Minister says, oh, it's not the production, it's the consumption of fossil fuel that has to stop. And that to me is highly problematic, coming from the Prime Minister who's leading many of these global climate forums and saving oceans and whatnot. So the other thing I think students would be able to do after reading this book, and as Hannah, you rightly point out, they would be able to do political ecology, because political ecology is so vast. And I think what you also do is you break silos in this book. You make us open our minds in terms of how do we really bridge natural and social sciences? How do we bridge disciplines or within social sciences, which might not often speak to each other. And you do that beautifully through your case studies, even using quantitative work, and each time coming back to what you introduced in the first and the second chapters. And that way, in some ways, it reminded me of Amitav Ghosh's Shadow Lines, which was this one novel where you followed lives of people across different continents, but you never lost the plot. And this is what this book does. You never lost the plot of a Marxist political economy, of environmental justice, which, you know, goes through this red thread that goes throughout the book. And I think what it really should make students do is political ecology at home. And that's very important, because we are often looking for case studies. Oh, let's go to some rural parts of Africa or somewhere in India and find what is there to study. No, I think in developed countries, it should begin at home. And in some ways, then you don't do a local to global analysis, but the cross-scalar analysis becomes questioning the global meta-narrative of Norway's climate policy, which in a way is the global first world climate policy, and then going and ground truthing and testing these empirically in a systematic manner. And yeah, and I think this also brings out this underbelly of the Norwegian, the dark underbelly of the Norwegian state. Like we often talk about the indigenous discourses and rights, but the Sami discourse is often absent in that. And that I think is a very important also addition to this book. I also really like your special critique, because I think critical cartography is what is necessary at the moment, especially when we are talking about 30 by 30 and half Earth and setting aside 50% terrestrial and marine biodiversity. And I think you touch upon this, you know, through the Sami maps that, you know, yes, maps are important, but this the critical aspect of the map, the surveillance aspects that one needs to talk about. And finally, I think some of the questions, something you write here, which really stayed with me, was better research does not yield better policies. Then what are we supposed to do really if better research does not yield better policies? Because counterintuitively it should, right? And also both of you have been scathing critics of the Norwegian society, and I find it like people here don't really want to critique things. I mean, the vaccination program super delayed. Norway is vaccinating at the rate of probably slower than India. No one seems to talk about that. So I was just wondering, like, what is the way forward in terms of engaging with policy? Because a lot of the students who read this book in the bachelor and master's level will not necessarily go on to become academics, and there aren't enough jobs in academia to begin with. So if we want these students who might go and work with Equinor, how do they influence policy if this remains with them? So that kind of a bridge was something I was thinking about, but overall, I think there's a lot. And something else I think I really liked about the book was you introduce a variety of concepts and theories without really doing high theory and overcomplicating things. And there is a way where each student can, or anyone that reads the book, I think this is a great book for natural scientists, for them to go back and look up exactly what they want to kind of delve deeper into. So I think overall, I really enjoyed reading it. And I think this forms some form of a foundation for a lot of students and natural scientists, and even humanities scholars, environmental humanities, where we are talking about political ecology, but to know, where it begins, how do you do it? How do you do this cross-scalar interactions and critically question notions of power, spatial analysis, and so on. So yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much. Tor and Hannah, do you want to respond as we go, or shall we keep going and then you can respond to the discussants questions collectively? I just have my eye on the time, and it's 10:50 and we only have until 11:30, and we have probably about 20 more minutes of discussants questions, so, and a few in the chat pane as well.
So far I'm speechless, so so I think we can just continue.
Okay, great. So Mariel, you are next up, so I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief, but I'm very happy and grateful for the opportunity to comment on the book. And I want to start by telling that there are certain moments in which I wish I had the book before. Some years ago, a colleague of mine told me that he didn't really understand what political ecology was about. He was aware of the fact that it was not a branch of ecology, but still he didn't understand what it was. So I told him that political ecology is what political ecologists do, as Hannah was mentioning also. And I think that the book is very much about showing what political ecologists do, and in that way define the field. And I think I like very much, I'm also an educator, and I really appreciate the way in which they show that political ecology is a research-based approach to study the relationship between people and environment. I also think that even if the book is a textbook for grad students, it also is a relevant reference for people who is familiar with the field, or even researchers in political ecology, because the references in each chapter and through the book, I will say that the book compiles the political ecology canon, if there's such a thing. We can discuss that in another occasion, but that is what I would like to say. I also think that if my claim that political ecology is what political ecologists do is right, then a very important contribution of the book is that the rich and detailed account of different methods that are used in political ecology. And I will think that the book compiles what I will call the methodological toolbox of political ecology. I think that the book, that one of the things that the different chapters do, and the book as a whole also does, is to help us understand how nature becomes or is transformed into resources by illuminating the role that institutions, discourses, and other forms of power play in processes of commodification and exclusion or inclusion of different actors into the distributions of benefits and burdens from accessing nature that is converted into resources. I think that also the book reflects the praxis of two political ecologists who have devoted part of their lives to contribute to changing the world, not only through their research and active engagement in public debates, they both are very active in the public debates in Norway, but also, and very importantly, through forming the younger generation. So as educators, I think that the book is also a great achievement and a great support for other educators in the field. A colleague of mine and I were writing a reader in political ecology, and we're going to use, of course, the work of Tor and Anna, but also chapter 2. I think it's just genius. It's really great to have for educators. There's one thing that I disagree a little bit with what is in the book, and it's my bias. So I admit that I'm guilty of that bias. But I think the definition of the roots of peasant studies presented in the book is a little bit, I say it's a little bit, falls a little bit short, because I think that peasant studies as a branch of political economy emerges as a response to the limitations of classic Marxism on all things agrarian, is broader than just, it goes beyond understanding peasant resistance to modernization, which is what you write in the book. Because of course, peasant studies and political ecology have many things in common. And in the 70s, already in the 70s, peasant studies was concerned with studying dynamics of agrarian transformations in Latin America, African, and Asian colonial experiences. And this has been integrated and pushed forward by political ecology. And I think that the work of, for instance, Bernstein and Wolf and Mintz and others have influenced political ecologists as much as Chayanov and Scott. But also, I will have liked that one can speak, however, briefly of how political ecology has also contributed to push the field of peasant studies. And I think also the critique that has been put forward on Scott's notion of hidden resistance by political ecologists working in Latin America, for instance, with the Movimiento de Trabajadores Agrícolas sin Tierra, it's an important contribution. I think that universities should contribute not only to the education of the working force, but also to the formation of critical citizens who are able to participate in democracy. I have acted as examiner in one of Tor's courses for a number of years, and I have heard many critical voices from his students. So I do think that political ecology contributes to forming critical citizens, but I have a question for you on this. And it's given the current political moment that we are living in Europe and elsewhere with fake news and conspiracy theories, and showing that research might be wrong or biased. And also political ecology's engagement with deconstructing taken for granted narratives and also research. I was wondering if an explicit reflection how political ecology itself offered tools to confront precisely alternative facts and fake news. I think that might have been useful for students. And lastly, I think that Tor and Hanne have been pioneers in opening the space for political ecology scholarship in Norway. And they have also contributed generously to shape a number of younger researchers, myself included. And I would like to end with a question to both of you. And this is, do you think that in some years we will be able to distinguish a Norwegian or Scandinavian political ecology school that sets itself apart in choice of themes, methods, or theoretical preferences? So that's what I had to say. Thank you very much, and congratulations with the book, Tor and Hanne.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mariel. So I think we'll continue moving right along to Ben. And then we'll try to, you have a formidable task, Tor and Hanne, in trying to respond to all of these different comments at once, and I'll throw in a few more from the chat pane. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and the organizers. Not every day do I get to sort of rant and rave about the current state of political ecology, and to discuss this really important text in reference to it. What I'm going to do is try to keep it to this 10 minutes of general comments, provide the good, the bad, but I'll save the ugly, not for the book necessarily, but for thinking about the future of political ecology. I want to kind of highlight what I feel and has been brewing for a while is the collective kind of, particularly our collective shortcomings as a cohort in making political ecology accessible. And I think this is really important, and I think has been noted by a few of the commenters at this point, now more than ever, our ability to outreach and speak to wider audiences. This book made me think about when I was a graduate student, just hearing for the first time about political ecology. My cohort at Rutgers University in the US had our own sort of litmus test to see if we sort of had earned our street cred, if we were political ecology enough or not. There was always a sort of ambiguous consensus in political ecology. There was no real way to prove if something fit the mold, right? But we would just sort of say, and there was a saying that went around, you just sort of knew it when you saw it. The phrase I later learned, I know it when I see it, came into fashion in the 1960s by the US Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart to describe the sort of threshold for obscenity in a case involving an illicit film and soon becoming kind of one of the best known phrases in the history of the US Supreme Court. Stewart said in his deliberations, in relation to porn, I know when I see it. And the movie involved in this case is not that. Well, in relation to the book, Hanne and Tor's new book is just that. Well, it's not porn, but it's, of course, political ecology. It's foundational. It represents an extensive body of work over time, both on discourse and knowledge production. It's one of those books that bring us back from when we kind of do so well, venture theoretically and empirically out there, but sometimes falling into the kind of ontological trap of the political ecology of everything. And I don't mean this in sort of a gatekeeping exercise. I would argue it is books like this that actually give us the confidence that go out and test political ecology's limits in our own research. But it's not just this, and as noted before, my second point about this book is that it's indispensable for us as educators of political ecology. Now, for those of us who have taught political ecology would probably attest that for all its research and analytical dynamism, for some reason, it's just super damn challenging thing to teach, particularly at the entry level, either undergraduates or masters. We've all kind of struggled to put together the right political ecology syllabus. We jumble multiple journal articles, which are reality abridged versions of larger studies, and we're never able to give them their due course, many times sort of backtracking on the key debates and arguments, right? Or employ sort of elongated monographs, which need more than seminars and the time we're able to give them. What this book does so well is that it provided a body of work around some of the most important core themes of political ecology. studies that span over time, thematic complexity, and provide a window into empirical richness. And the case studies here are certainly rich, covering years of dedicated field work, diverse cases, bioprospecting, which I know really well, and his work, carbon red projects in Tanzania, classic dryland peasants herd conflicts, which is so well sort of brought together from both a Norwegian context and that being West and East Africa. And it remains relevant, and it becomes a sort of standard barrier. It certainly makes noise when it hits the table. It's the book, I feel, that you pull off your shelf when a student new to political ecology comes into your office, or used to come into our offices, and hungry to learn more about the lecture you just gave on sort of critical gendered livelihoods. Or the plant science colleague, right, who's been in the office next door to you for years, and who needs to understand why, for some reason, today, their Gates-funded lab trials of new sort of cotton varietals never gets adopted in the field, right? And since you have sort of ecology in your job title, maybe you could help, right? And the list goes on. All these people out there who don't know what political ecology is. See, we're not here to only do research in political ecology, but we're translators, we're communicators who need to clearly teach political ecology, and not just to students, from a structural materialist, feminist, constructivist, post-structural, decolonial, and many more brands of political ecology. We need to explain to those who just have no idea what political ecology is. I think we sometimes do not want to believe it, but we are in a bubble, a kind of warm, self-contained bubble of political ecologists, an echo chamber of retweets, hearts, likes, and the rest of it, right? We do really good work, but we do not do great outreach. We need to teach this book, talk about this book to others and colleagues. For those who have taught, this is my plea in a way. We need to start sort of speaking, translating, communicating political ecology in a way that reaches out and is made accessible. This book, amongst others, is a really great starting point. But we need to begin writing in a way, the way in which this book does, beyond all the jargon, so that we can kind of access people beyond academia. In no way am I saying to dumb it down, but actually, we need to smarten it up. We need to be better writers. Cut through the noise with clear messages. Okay, that's my rant. You asked me to talk about political ecology in the contemporary sort of period in relation to the book, I did. Now what I don't necessarily love about the book. I think the conclusion could do more. Not every book could do everything, but I still think this one could have pushed a bit more, particularly on a few central themes, right? Geopolitics. I know we've mentioned this already, particularly Norway as a petro-state, right? A neo-authoritarian kind of regime, and also sort of intermixing with some of the work, as we just mentioned, on post-truth and post-truth sort of populism. I think there could have been a bit more engagement with the urban and infrastructural political ecologies. You know, definitely the book's a stalwart on rural peasant studies and the tradition of political ecology. But many of us live in and work in cities. Many students are engaging in cities. There's an industrial political ecology, which I think could have been wrapped in here, at least just a little bit. The decolonial, right? Well, it does engage with the decolonial, but I think, of course, we could have pushed this a bit more. The last thing I want to say about the book, and just sort of to sort of wrap it up here, I think the way in which the questions, and this isn't necessarily a critique about the book per se, but the way in which we teach political ecology, and a whole host of other studies, the way in which we give students questions and the way in which we sort of have them, we provide questions for students. I wonder if there could have been a space by which we actually push for students to start to create and formulate and nudge them to create their own questions, right? I think this, of course, is never perfect, but it's the sort of hallmark of critical political ecology, to start to sort of relate your case studies that you're learning about and sort of formulate your own questions around them. Some of the toolboxes given in the book are excellent, but I wonder if we could start sort of working around ways in which students and others can help create their own questions around political ecology, a sort of toolbox for question building. Overall, I love the book. I'm going to teach the book, and no book could do everything. But still, I wonder if it could be nudged to do a bit more in terms of allowing us to be as a cohort more accessible with our work, and it could teach us to write better, be better political ecology writers. I'll end it.
Thanks so much, Ben, and thanks to all of the discussants, an excellent set of comments and questions. Maybe I will just throw in the two questions that have been raised in the chat pane as well, and then Tora and Hannah, you can try to weave these all together in your responses. So one which speaks to a point that I think Anwesha raised right away, and that others said that they appreciated, is why did you use films and pop culture examples to illustrate environmental issues? And then the section question is, how can political ecology be used to present a case that isn't part of a wider group, is the terminology that the Inquisitor uses. So I think they mean, for example, a national case study, such as you talked about. And they give the specific example of a case of a worker in the green industry. So those are the two additional questions for you guys. So yeah, I don't know whether one of you wants to respond first. I'll just I'll shut up and you guys can take turns. Yeah.
Do you want to start, Hannah, or you have to unmute?
Please start, Twitter.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what can I say? Perhaps we invited the wrong discussants. I think you are too kind with us. As I said, I'm speechless. I mean, it's really an honor to get such positive comments overall. Well, Ben had some. Perhaps I should start with Ben's comments because he had some critical comments at the end. And I could also perhaps start with the question on pop culture, because that comes to mind now, because I think Anwesha actually answered that. She said you also have to have fun, and it's a way of trying to have a bit of fun while we write, and use fiction and pop culture as, because the Avatar movie is known by people, so why not try to use it? That's the main reason, I suppose, that we are trying to use examples that are known to people. It's about making trying to become better at outreach, as Ben talked about. We have a challenge to do there as political ecologists, to work with communication and to political ecology as an academic field has grown tremendously in number of publications and in university courses, and there is a big popularity among students and young scholars in particular, but we don't have the political impact. We basically are marginalized politically and neglected. And so the question is how to reach out and become heard. I think that's the general challenge we have, as Ben, I think, and several of you touched upon. So, but of course there are I think I agree with Mariel's point about the peasant studies, and that our presentation of peasant studies might be a bit short, and that might be true. I have to think about that. And also, I think Ben had some good points. We should, even though the book builds on our own research, and we haven't done urban political ecology as yet, but I'm hoping to do some urban political ecology in the future, trying to link dispossession, land dispossession, to migration to slums, and see if there is a link and to what extent there is a link. So I might do some urban political ecology in the future, and perhaps the next version of the book might include a chapter on urban political ecology. So I agree with your critiques there, Ben, that we could also have extended the discussion about Norway as a petrostate and the geopolitics around that, and could also have perhaps extended the colonial critique a bit more than what we did. Although we mentioned decolonialism and the debates about that a little bit, but I agree that we could have done more out of that. Yeah, so I don't know if there was a question, Anwesha had a question about women in rural Norway, but that you might want to respond to, and yeah, there are a couple of other questions from Mariel on how does political ecology confront false news, and whether we foresee a Scandinavian political ecology in the future. But I don't know if you would want to address those, Anna.
I think I will start with something else, and then we'll come to it all. But I first of all, thank you very much to all three of you. It's of course fantastic to get comments like this, and Tor and I, we are really aware of a lot of things that this book and books like this can always be yeah, we can do better in all senses. But I did appreciate some of the few critical suggestions for where to go. But first, I really wanted to say something about. I think it was Anwesha who said. It's a bit unclear where we go from research to action and solutions, and I think you all mentioned something about this. It's a paradox. We do studies about grave situations, and not so much usually happens afterwards. And where do we go from action to elaborate solutions? And I think that is the most important that political ecologists can do from now on, is first of all to look at solutions, not the more or less silly versions of mainstream solutions that we can very easy, unpack, uncover how they are not really working of various reasons, but go on to green solutions that are proposed and that we can contribute, I think, with backgrounds in political ecology to suggest, you know, how do we, what directions can we go in, and what are parts of really sustainable solutions? And that can be done in several different ways on micro and macro scales. And because our book is our book also is like most other political ecology, that we are better in using the hatchet, as Paul Robbins calls it, than providing seeds for how to change things. Yeah, so I see, you know, Ben, when looking at where political ecology can go, I think this is one of the most important way to go with political ecology. And then I think another issue to look at as political ecologists also is that, you know, working situations at universities and for researchers are getting worse and worse, and there is more and more limited spaces to do critical studies that we want to study and to teach in critical fields. And I think, yeah, it's a paradox that, you know, we see that the mainstream ways of thinking about sustainable development and with implementing SDGs and so on, that is what universities are emphasizing, although they should emphasize, you know, much more focus on critical studies and elaborations of real solutions and education that can go make people prepared to contribute there. And so when this happens in you know, the types of studies that where political ecology is first of all taught, I think that what political ecologists and the field, where this field should go is also in other directions. I mean, into other educations. I think that we need to educate teachers in thinking in the political ecology's way of thinking, because now we are getting new generations who are taught at school that what they do themselves is their private actions is the only thing that helps, and you know, the market types of solutions will bring us there into avoiding the worst scenarios of climate change and so on. And I think we need to get political ecology into teachers' education. And another thing, similarly, we need to get political ecology into journalism education, because that's also, you know, have such a large impact what journalists learn and what they write about, what they see, how they perceive, how they interpret what is going on. Yeah, so I think these are the most important directions that I think all of you suggest that, yeah, we have to think about where do we want to go. These are areas that I think we should move in as an epistemic community of political ecology. So I think I stopped there. Okay. I'll come back later.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Hannah. So we are now down to 8 minutes in our scheduled time. So my suggestion is that we open the floor to questions from from attendees. Please use the raise hands function and I will scroll through to make sure that I catch you. And in the meantime, I will just say that Ben has posed a follow-up question, which is, what does a political ecology trainer or teacher training look like? So you can consider that while I hunt for other questions. And please, yeah, if you have a question from the floor, don't hesitate to step forward.
Hanne, do you want to respond to that, to Ben's question?
Oh yeah, I can respond immediately to that. Just really short. It will be to combine political ecology with critical education, critical pedagogy in the friere fashion, and it's I'm at a faculty of teachers education and international studies, and so this is what we think a lot about, but we are in the beginning of that work at our place, and we also had a double session of pollen now a few months ago, and with several contributors to a political ecology of education. Thanks.
Great. Okay, I see a question from Christian. Christian, do you want to jump in here?
Sure, it was just a question, and I've already received a response from one person through the chat, but it's about the experience for you, Tor and Hanne, and maybe other colleagues. How do students react to this book as opposed to Paul's book and Paul Robin's book? And I'm in particular curious from the context of a European non-Anglophone student body, where Paul Robbins writes in a way that presumes a certain knowledge of a certain culture. And I haven't been able to test your book yet. I'm curious whether there's others that have that experience. So thanks for your effort in writing the book, and hello, by the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, nice to see you. Nice to see you, Christian. And thanks for attending this. Well, I've been using Paul Robbins' book in the course. This is a master's course in political ecology that I've been teaching since, well, I started in 2002, and Paul's book, the first edition, came in 2004. And of course, he came with a new edition in 2012, and then in 2019, I think. So I've used all those editions, and I recognize what you say. I think it's a great book, but it has also its limitations for perhaps non-Anglophone students, in the sense that it might be a bit complicated for some who do not have English as their first language. This year, I taught the same course now in spring, and I used both our book and Paul's book in addition to some articles. So I'm not in a position to compare the books, and I shouldn't do that, but I don't know, there are some of the students who follow the course are here, so they might want to say something or post something in the chat. Otherwise, I don't know. You would have to try and see. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll let you know if I do it.
Great. I see one more question in the chat, and then I see that Anna Sophie, and I'm sorry, I can't read the second name there, but also has a question. So the question in the chat is, do you have any examples of successful political ecology seeds that could maybe be an inspiration to all of us who are trying to move from hatchets to seeds? And Anna Sophie and friend, do you guys want to throw yours into the mix as well, and then they can respond to both?
It was just a comment because I just took the class with Tor Benjaminsen, and so it was to respond to Christian, in addition that I already wrote to him in the chat, that yes, it's a good compliment, especially for me. I'm not an English speaker, and the political ecology book from Hanne and Tor, it's a very good introduction of what the field does and what the field talks about and what are the grounds, and also a very sincere way of understanding the limitations and the potential challenges whenever using political ecology. So as a student that never heard political ecology before the last semester, I can say that it's a great book. So that was it.
Excellent. That's great. So, so the remaining question is examples of moving from hatchets to seeds.
Yeah, that's that's a question that comes back in all the courses I've taught. And the question is, what is a seed? Of course, my argument is that a seed is when I give a lecture in political ecology, that is also a seed. Hopefully it works as a seed, you know, so critique and, you know, some of the work we do in political ecology is also, can also be seen as seed. And then the question is, what is a seed more than that? I mean, a related field that is more on the seed side is, you know, the degrowth movement and perhaps also environmental justice that works more, that is more activist and works more in directly in trying to change politics, and which are, though both those fields are to some extent in also in communication with political ecology, and I think more and more in mutual inspiration, I think. So, but that's always a hard question. I mean, what we should do as political ecologists is probably to write a bestseller a la Jared Diamond's, you know, germ steels and what is it? Germ steels and something.
Germs, and steel.
Germs, and steel, or something. You know, that would be a fantastic seed, and that's a challenge to us. Challenge to Ben to write that type of bestseller.
Can I contribute something?
Yeah, of course, Hannah.
I think that we should use that suggestion from Ben here, and to, you know, everything we teach, then we should ask the students, okay, now what could be a seed here? Yeah. So
yeah, I think it's a great observation. I mean, it's a collective project, right? Not just up to an individual.
Can I also just respond to that question that Anwesha asked about rural women in Norway, and how did they react? I've met several women who, after we finished with this research, they are not surprised, you know, because this is a reality, a part of the reality that they have been so used to. On the one hand, you have the Norwegian society where everybody says that we in Norway we have gender equality, and then they know that in rural areas, the most important questions, they are you know, sort of monopolized in many municipalities by the most powerful men, those who have gotten to positions in local politics, and there is no space for women. But there are some changes that are taking place there as well. But I think that some of these women also were quite amazed about what our study showed about the way that the Norwegian government used this situation. I mean, they choose the Directorate for Nature, they choose to ignore this situation and the lack of women participants from the municipalities, because that was a way of you know, being able to carry through with this huge this huge strategy of establishing and widening out protected areas in Norway. Yeah. So thank you for that question, Anwesha.
Excellent. Okay, well, we are now a little bit beyond our scheduled end time, but there's one last question, which I think makes a nice sort of end potentially to the session, which is from someone who has used the Norwegian version of the book or earlier versions quite successfully in the past, and is asking and says that it's, you know, it's very successful because it's interesting to Norwegian students. So they are curious as to whether a new Norwegian edition will be forthcoming.
Perhaps. Not now, but maybe in 2-3 years, we'll see. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, for you know, from my end, thank you again, everybody, for attending, and for Discussants for the engagement with this great book. And once again, we will record this is being recorded, so we will post the recording under the events tab of the Political Ecology Forum space within the next 2 or 3 days, likely. So yeah, thanks everybody, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.